Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Dr. Chris Featherstone here. So, I've been away for a while, unfortunately, because I had COVID. How about that? Just had a rush a couple weeks ago. Had a major rush of symptoms. Ended up testing positive. Just ruined. I was supposed to go do some journalism to go to WrestleMania. The hours after the morning after I found out, so I had to shut that down, quarantine for over a week, for 10 days, and so yeah, it was pretty bad. So after my quarantine was up, the next morning I went to the hospital because I had back surgery. So I've been recovering from back surgery, so it's been spending a lot of my time at home, most of my time at home. So yeah, it's been a pretty hectic 3 weeks for me, but at the same time, I'm still managing. I'm no longer COVID contagious, and I feel good. No fever. Haven't had a fever for a week. Praise the Lord. Feeling good. Still sore from my back surgery, but very manageable. Can walk around and do things like that. So I am super grateful that I am on the the positive end of all of this that came. So thankfully, all of my family tested negative. I was the only one who tested positive. Have some theories of how it could have happened, but not quite sure. But at the end of the day, I'll take it for the team any day of the week. I was glad that I only got it and not my family. So I was able to keep them safe. Thankfully, our house is big enough to completely separate myself from my family, and that's what we did. And so they stayed safe, and everybody's good, and everybody's back together and having dinner together and all that good stuff. So that is a brief synopsis of my absence the past few weeks. So I had a client that we were talking about pornography addiction. I was really giving him some nuggets as far as pornography addiction, and I was really wanting to have this conversation with Christians about pornography addiction. Now, I think it's really, really important to understand the implications of pornography addiction, and that it is a major statistic for Christians and non-Christians. Last time I checked, research-wise, 65% of non-Christian men and 30% of non-Christian women admit that they have had some pornography addiction, and 64% of Christian men and 15% of Christian women admitted that. So essentially, the statistics mirror with Christian and non-Christian men when it comes to pornography addiction, which is definitely not surprising for me as a psychology doctor, because men are very sexual, beings. They're very animalistic. Our sex drives are very high. Typically, we're primal, and things like that. So that's not a surprise to me, honestly. But I think it's important for me as a clinician, as a psychology doctor, to lay down the facts of why pornography addiction is so damaging to your brain. So when you think of pornography addiction, it actually influences your prefrontal cortex. Now, when you're thinking of your prefrontal cortex deal with perception. It deals with willpower. It deals with rational thinking. It deals with social development, cognitive development. Those are all things that deal with your, that are functions of your prefrontal cortex. What happens is once you consume pornography, especially from a frequency standpoint, what happens there is it damages your prefrontal cortex. It creates a vivid stamp of an image that really confuses and thwarts your prefrontal cortex to think and act rationally, because you're starting to escape in a realm of fantasy that is not reality. So your brain is twirling between reality and fantasy, and it's affecting your tolerance levels, and it's affecting your way to handle things effectively. And it actually, there's a lot of studies that show that pornography consumption actually reverts one's mind, an adult's mind, back into a juvenile mindset. So one of the biggest things when it comes to the thought and cognitive development between a adult and a minor is the ability to think rationally. That is one of the biggest things. That's the reason why there's age limits to rent a car, to drive a car, to drink, so those things, that the cognitive development is one of the biggest factors of the importance of understanding the thought processes of adults compared to children. All right. That's the reason why, I would, a 30-year-old would have a better chance of managing a bank account than a 3-year-old. All right. Because the cognitive ability is much more when it comes to an adult male or female compared to a child. All right. So what happens is the ability to think rationally is major when it comes to those that dynamic there. When you consume pornography, it reverts the adult rational mindset back to a childlike mindset, and it thwarts and heavily influences negatively the ability to think rationally. All right, so us psychology experts, we call it escapism. All right, so typically what happens with pornography is that you have a bunch of things that's going on. All right, I deal with a lot of patients who deal with anxiety and ADHD. All right, so I give them this pen analogy that I coined, and I tell them this is how I show them. I got a bunch of pens here, and so what happens is I got a bunch of pens. And each pen is a particular task that I'm giving, or I'm allowing myself to have per day. All right. For instance, let's do me. All right. I have to get up in the morning, do all the hygiene things. The first thing when I do get up is I pray and I read my Bible. Do those things. Some morning stuff. I make lunch for my daughter. She's in daycare. Any snacks that my sons need. I take my children to daycare and school in the morning. And then I either work from my home office or my work office. So I'm working all day. I go to the gym after work. I come home with my family and do dinner. I do podcast work, and I do schoolwork. All right. So on a particular day, there's other things, I'm a small group leader and things like that. But on a particular day, I'm holding 8 pens. All right. So if kids need me to do something, if wife needs me to do something, if I get an emergency email from a client, things like that. So I'm already getting more pens. All right. So this had to occur with a lot of skill and being able to manage my time. But on an average day, on a typical day, not only are people dealing with this with high anxiety, but they're also dealing with, oh my goodness, I got a test this weekend. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that conversation that happened with that person. Oh my goodness, I got a meeting. I don't know how it's going to work. I got a presentation next month. I don't know how to do it. So essentially, someone with high anxiety and or ADHD is dealing with this every day. All right. My spouse and I are, seeing eye to eye or something like that. So that's another pin. All right. So this is the mind of someone who's dealing with ADHD quite a bit. All right. And anxiety and high anxiety. So what happens is, especially from the standpoint of a guy, is I'm trying to handle all of these things all at once. And I'm also trying to feel like I can manage it and not seek therapy for it, because I got this. I got this. I got so much bravado. I got this, right? So what happens is, this is where the escapism psychological term comes in. They resort to a screen because they can't handle this. It's just not, they're not able to handle all this by themselves. So what happens is they say, okay, I'll engage into fantasy world. I'll temporarily get a fix and escape from this through this screen. So as I'm watching the screen, I'm escaping away from all the pins. All right. So here's the deception. Once you're done watching the screen, guess what comes back? The pins right in front of your face. And so what happens is, oh man, pins are back. Screen, temporary suspends pins. Done with screen, pins come back. So in order to help the addiction when it comes to pornography, anything really, drugs, you can add drugs in this too. What happens is the fear of all these things coming in leads to the anxiety. The anxiety leads to the depression. The depression leads into the escapism. All right. Isolation and abandonment are two of the biggest factors of depression. No one understands, no one hears me, and things like that. That's why, unfortunately, suicide is huge. And unfortunately, the reason why pastors deal with suicide, because not only do they feel like no one hears them, but they don't tell anybody. And so they have to deal with this, and it becomes too much. And so the best way to handle this effectively is to seek therapy, because this is what a therapist does. A therapist helps you systematically talk about and deal with all of these pins, all right? And at the end of the day, the therapist will, a good therapist, will be honest with you and say, guess what? You can only deal with this on a daily basis. These got to go. You can't do it. All right. Because you're going to get probably 2 to 3 more a day from externally. So internally, this is it. You got to deal with it for your health, for your personal well-being. You can only deal with these pins on a daily basis. If you try to pick up this, you are hurting yourself. You are hurting yourself. Don't do it. Because what's going to happen is you're going to pick these back up again, and then you're going to realize how overwhelming they are. And guess where you're going to go? You're going to go back to the screen. All right. Because you're going to use that as a way of escape. All right. So do not continue to damage your prefrontal cortex. And that's what pornography does. Your frontal lobe. And what happens is it damages it because it affects your willpower. It affects your ability to think rationally. It affects your tolerance level with other people. And especially when you're married, this is what it does. It creates a false sense of comparison. an unfair sense of comparison, because you're dealing with so many different body types. You're dealing with a very fantasy and false sense of sex drive, and you're torturing yourself, because this is essentially what you're doing. You are being a part of that sexual act. You're watching that, pretending and wanting to be there, wanting to be a part of that sexual act. What if you want to feel her breast or touch her butt or do whatever, or penetrate her, or whatever it is that you want to do with that particular person in that screen. You're watching the act, but essentially what you're doing is you're chaining yourself to a chair, and you're sitting in that room with them. And even though you're there in the room with them, they can't see you, they can't hear you, they can't feel you, you can't feel them, you can't do any of that stuff. So you're chained to a chair saying, I want to do it, I want to feel her too, I want to do all these things too, and they can't see you or hear you. That's essentially what's going on when you're looking at a screen. And so they can't see you, they can't feel you, they can't smell you, they can't touch you, you can't touch them. But the enemy is creating such a distorted thought in your head that you can touch them, that you can feel them, that you can physically see them. And so that is the deception that goes on in your mind. That is the fantasy that's created. And then what happens is, when you're in a marriage or even a relationship, specifically a marriage, what happens is that false sense of reality becomes a perception of truth. And then you start to compare your spouse to that person, or those persons, if it's an addiction to you. And your tolerance level starts to lower when it comes to your spouse. Your expectation levels start to lower. You start wanting her to feel a certain way sexually, to think a certain way sexually. Here's the anecdote to that. And this is stuff that I've told clients before. If you know that you have a high sex drive, and that is something that you know, and that, perfectly, y'all didn't have sex before marriage. But for those who did beforehand, can't do nothing about that. You're forgiven, repent, walk away from that. You're married now, so, but if you are still single, a single Christian couple, even non-Christian couple, but particular single Christian couple, if you're still abstinent and you still haven't had sex with each other, one, as your brother, don't do it. It's not worth it. It's worth saving. And two, understand that you should have those conversations. If you feel better, have them with an accountable third-party couple or something like that, as far as your sex drive is concerned. Be honest with yourself. Say, look, I have a very high sex drive, and when we get married, I'm going to tear you up. Like, that's just how I'm feeling. I have a very high sex drive, all right? And your sex drive with your spouse, I mean, if that's something that you really, really, really want, have those conversations. Have those conversations. Be real with each other. Say, look, I'm really hoping that our sex drive will be pretty high, when we're married, because mine is really, really, in order to tame it, it's going to take, 4, 5, 6 days a week. So be honest with yourself when it comes to that in that couple stage, especially when you're married. So when you have that conversation with each other, put it in action. Do life with each other. Explore with each other. This is what I tell one of my clients. Because a lot of times guys, they go to a screen because they're too afraid to have the wild and crazy conversations with their spouse. Have those conversations with your spouse. You might discover that your spouse is just as wild and crazy as you are. The marriage bed is undefiled. So as long as it's dealing with you and your spouse alone, no porn, no other person, look, if you want to have, just wild sex in the bed with you and your spouse, have at it. Have at it. Have fun doing it. And so have those conversations. Be real with your spouse and say, look, I am a freak. All right. I am committed to you, but I'm going to be honest. I want to touch you all over. I want to feel on you. I want to have you alone and fun and wild, and just let our desires run free in the bed. All right. And have those conversations, because essentially what you're going to do is you're going to be willing, and note this down. Tell yourself, I am willing to embarrass myself with sharing my desires with my spouse than being embarrassed by watching pornography. All right, let me say that again. I'm willing to embarrass myself sharing my desires with my spouse than being embarrassed by watching pornography. All right, invest that time with your spouse sexually. Conversations, transparency. I'm a freak. Just be honest with her. Be honest with him, ladies. I'm a freak. I want sex, and have it. 1 Corinthians 7, promotes that. Don't withhold from each other. Have sex. Have lots of it. If that's something that y'all mutually agree on. So do it. And for those who have a lower sex drive, look, if you know that your spouse has a high sex drive, do it. Do it. I mean, that's really, you can't get as direct, any more direct than that. Just do it. Just don't give the enemy any foothold. Don't give anybody any type of ammunition to want to infiltrate your marriage. And I've said this to my client before. Look, invest in your wife. Ladies, invest in your husband throughout the day. Send pleasantries, send pictures, send very provocative comments, because this is what that does. And this is, if someone out there is married and dealing with pornography, this is a way to deal with the pornography. One, get those pins and seek a therapist to be honest with you, to tell you what you can and can't handle. All right. For one, don't make it escape. Don't escape. Don't use pornography at all, but specifically don't use it as a way of escape because you're dealing with so much anxiety and depression. All right. 2, have a conversation and be sexual with your wife. Invest all that time that you're wasting in pornography and spend it in your wife. Be willing to embarrass yourself at the expense of already being embarrassed by watching pornography. Have that conversation, and wife, open that up to him. Have and even do it yourself to him. Say, I'm thinking about you. I want to touch all over you. Send messages throughout the day, because here's the thing, especially if someone's at work, if I'm sending messages to my wife and my wife is sending messages to me, especially if the wife is sending it to the husband knowing that he's already a hound and ready to rock anyways, that's showing him that you ready to rock and roll too. And so if you're sending pictures, if you're sending, peaches, and he's sending eggplants and all those things, that is investing your time and concentrating your time on your spouse. So I'm thinking in my head, look, if my spouse is sending me all these messages and I'm getting aroused, look, I ain't got time to be thinking about coworker, down the cubicle or down the block or down the hallway or office. If my wife is sending me hot pics and pleasantries and I'm getting horny looking at, pictures and messages, I'm investing in my wife. I'm looking at this phone and I'm like, oh, I'm ready to rock. I'm excited, and if someone tries to come and flirt, you're like, what? Excuse me, because you're thinking about getting home with your wife and getting it in. So invest in each other sexually that way throughout the day, and that will drastically improve any inclination or any desire to fill a void. That's really big when it comes to pornography too, filling a void. So make that investment within each other. All right. So my prayer is that, those who are struggling with pornography, and trust me, years ago, that was me, a transparency moment. I struggle with pornography. I'm free from it. Praise the Lord. And over the years, I've done a bunch of research and developed tools from a therapeutic standpoint to help others deal with it too. So don't let it be an escape route. It's not going to help. It affects your brain. It affects your brain, for 2. And for 3, for those who are married, even in a committed relationship, planning marriage, engagement, things like that. Don't let it come in the way of each other. And for those who are married, you have the God-given ability to explore healthy with your spouse. Take full advantage of that. Take full advantage of it. Explore with your spouse. Have wild lovemaking. That is the joy of being married. You have just the ability to touch and feel and everything else with you and your wife only. And yeah, it's exciting. So if y'all both got to lose a few pounds, go to the gym together. If y'all want to have that, that better body or whatever, help each other, encourage each other, give each other pleasantries. You look good today. You look sexy. Give each other those pleasantries. All right. And so invest in each other sexually, invest in each other intimately, fill each other with messages, pictures, all things like that, and don't give the enemy a foothold. All right, this is Dr. Chris Featherstone. I really, really pray for those who are still struggling with pornography. Trust me, I understand, and I understand how it is to be free from it and don't have a desire to get into it, and that can be you, and that will be you if you just take these tools and follow them. Spend some time in prayer, and of course, spend some time investing in Scripture and keeping yourself accountable. All right, God bless you all. Peace.